This is BBC News. I'm Anita McVeigh, live at Regent's Park in central London, where Donald Trump has started his working visit to the UK. The headlines at 4. Hand in hand, the US President and First Lady Melania Trump arrived at the US Ambassador's residence here in central London just over an hour ago.
I'm Christian Fraser, live in Oxfordshire, where President Trump's entourage has arrived early ahead of tonight's black tie dinner at Blenheim Palace.
Across the UK, extra security has been put in place as demonstrations are expected in protest at the President's visit. In other news, the government publishes its long-awaited Brexit white paper. The new Brexit Secretary, Dominic Raab, says the government has tried to come up with a bold, innovative and pragmatic approach.
People have to wait and read the detail in the white paper, and I think it strikes the right balance. It's innovative, it's ambitious, it is pragmatic, but we're looking for that win-win with the UK and our European friends.
England fans, don't look back in anger as more than 26 million people watch the Three Lions succumb to Croatia in the World Cup semi-final. Hello and welcome back to Regent's Park in central London. I'm Anita McVeigh. Joining us for continuing coverage of Donald Trump's visit to the UK. He arrived here at lunchtime with his wife, the First Lady Melania Trump, following some rather fractious exchanges at that NATO summit in Brussels, where he asked, and depending on who you listen to, you get different accounts of how nicely he asked for European allies to increase their spending on defence. Well, he's currently in the home of the US Ambassador to the UK, Winfield House, which is just beyond that security cordon behind me. Woody Johnson hosting him there at the moment, and also tonight. And then this evening he will go to Blenheim Palace, the birthplace of one of his heroes, Sir Winston Churchill, where the Prime Minister will host a dinner for him. At that dinner he'll be meeting lots of business leaders from here in the UK. And my colleague Christian Fraser is close to Blenheim Palace now. Christian.
Anita, thank you very much. Yes, 18 months after the invitation was first extended, the President is finally here. He's been to 17 countries before landing in the UK, and perhaps not the visit that he might have first envisaged. It's not a full state visit, it's more prosaically known as a 2-day working visit. And as Anita says, when he leaves the house of the US Ambassador later today, he'll come here to Blenheim Palace. Not the most glamorous backdrop you could have, given that we have this magnificent Baroque palace just down the road, but this gives you an idea of the sort of security there is in Oxfordshire today. Police drafted in from all around the country, and at various stages down the A44 behind me you'll see a police presence, vehicles being moved on, and of course trying to keep the protesters away from the President. Tonight, though, he will be choppered in here on Marine One into the grounds of Blenheim Palace, and there will be a certain pomp to it because the household division will be there, so the Scots, Welsh, Irish Guards will play a medley when he arrives in the Great Court just in front of Blenheim Palace, and then they'll go to a dinner with 150 CEOs from around the country, some of the biggest companies that have trade links with the United States. The Chancellor, the Prime Minister, and the Foreign Secretary will be there as well, and perhaps he'll get a moment just to savour the birthplace of Sir Winston Churchill. He was born here in 1874, spent a lot of his time here as a young boy, and of course in later life as the leader of the country, painting and writing in the Long Library, which I'm sure President Trump will see this evening when he visits the palace, now the home, incidentally, of the 12th Duke of Marlborough and his family. Well, let's speak to Sir Nigel Sheinwald, who's in our Millbank studio. He's is the former UK ambassador to the United States. He was in Washington from 2007 to 2012. So Nigel, good to have you with us. I suppose in his time, Sir Winston was a bit of a disruptor. What do you think he would make of this president?
Well, I think that he would want to see this president understanding not just the history and having not just an emotional fondness for the UK, but recognising that, that the United Kingdom is basically a team player that relies on its alliances and its place in the international system, and will work together with the UK in that way. And I think that's what his visit's going to be about, explaining some of the enduring aspects of the UK-US relationship, certainly giving him a bit of a flavour of the history along the way, but I think he needs to see it's a two-way street, that we contribute a lot to that relationship, that American jobs as well as British jobs are enabled by that two-way relationship, and then talk to Theresa May about some of the detail when they have their private meeting tomorrow. So I think there are limited objectives, frankly, for this visit. It's had its own history, as you mentioned right at the start, and I think it's a question of laying the groundwork for a better understanding of the UK and a better grounding in the realities of what alliances are.
Just looking at the YouGov poll that was published today, 50% of the public think the visit should go ahead. Perhaps Sir Winston would impress on the other 50%. How important this relationship is, as you say, the fact that it's such national strategic interest to the country.
It is an important relationship. It's not what it was in Winston Churchill's day. Let's not kid ourselves. When Churchill and Roosevelt met, they disposed of a lot more power than the United States and UK between them have today, particularly the UK. Our role in the world has changed fundamentally since the 1940s. But it is still a material element in world affairs. It counts for something. It has very deep roots in culture, in education, trade and economy, as well as in the core political and defence relationship. So I'm sure that he'll come away from this visit with a better understanding of that. Those things don't change overnight, but one of the paradoxes in a way about the UK-US relationship is it's very sensitive to our perception of as members of the public of the chemistry or absence of it between our two leaders. So I think that that's an important factor. The fact that the President of the United States has such a powerful personality is a factor in this relationship, undoubtedly. And that's something that Theresa May is going to have to deal with and has already had to deal with over the past 18 months.
And when you were in situ in Washington and looking after the visits of Gordon Brown and then David Cameron, I imagine that there was a script for how everything would go. The danger with this president is a lot of it is unscripted and highly unpredictable. And right at this moment, at a delicate time for the Prime Minister, that could be quite dangerous.
Of course, but I mean that's the reality of President Trump. He's practicing a different type of politics. He's a different sort of individual, a different sort of politician. I think everyone in the British government understands that. Everyone, I think, among the British public understands that. So I think we all have to not exactly aim off, but something like it, for the way that he goes about life and the way that he does business. But at the end of it, obviously there'll be a press conference. We'll be listening to what he has to say about the UK, what he has to say about Russia, what he has to say about the other international issues that they've been discussing. So it comes back to substance in the end. And as for the rest of it, well, we'll have to see whether when he's actually on our soil, whether he makes further comments about our national life and so on.
The paradox, of course, of this president, and this will be impressed on him, I dare say, by some of the business leaders that are here tonight, is that he's passionate about free trade, and yet he is the leader that is putting up trade barriers. What do you think they'll be trying to convey to him this evening?
I think they'll be trying to convey really a couple of things. I mean, that is a key point, that Britain, as we leave the European Union, as we try to strike deals with the rest of the world, needs a pretty stable world trading order. And the person who's disrupting that most of all is President Trump. Now, he'll have his reasons for that, which no doubt our government ministers can debate with him. But there's no doubt that this isn't the ideal or a benign atmosphere for the UK as it embarks on a new path after Brexit. And second, on the UK-US relationship, plainly on a future free trade deal between the two, that's obviously on the table. But I would say, number one, a degree of realism needs to emerge from these talks about its content and about the length of time that this is going to take, because this is not a panacea for the UK's problems and issues as we leave the European Union. It's going to be a tough one to negotiate. It's good that the President wants to negotiate such a thing, but we shouldn't be lulled into thinking that this is going to solve all our problems, because it will be very problematic to get it done.
Tomorrow, of course, he goes to Windsor. The Queen has met every president bar one, bar LBJ. Do you think she should be meeting him tomorrow? Is it right that that has been set up for him?
I think it's fine for him to call on the Queen. I think it's right that the state visit, which was talked about right at the start, has been postponed to a later date. I think it would have been wrong for him to make his first visit to the UK with all that panoply. I think this visit feels to me to have been weighted rather carefully so that the different elements of the relationship come through, that you can do it in a relatively short space of time, which is all that's available. A lot of other heads of government do call on the Queen briefly outside the normal format of a state visit, so that seems to me to be a perfectly natural and correct thing to be done.
Sir Nigel Sheinwald, good to have your company with us this afternoon. Thank you very much.